Excellencies, DDG Paugam, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dmitry Grozoubinski. I am the Executive Director of the Geneva Trade Platform, and it's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the Graduate Institute for this session on international cooperation on trade, climate, and sustainable development at the WTO, pragmatic options and unconventional thinking. By the time I've gotten that title out, most of our time has been used, but hopefully the rest of the session goes smoothly. In just a few moments, I will pass you into the capable hands of my friend and colleague, Caroline Deere-Birkbeck. Supporting Caroline as the hosts of TESS is one of the things we are proudest of at the Geneva Trade Platform, being able to watch that institution grow into the tour de force that it is today, carried on the shoulders of Caroline and her exceptional team, has just been a unique privilege and something that we'll always be proud of to have had a little bit of a hand on when we first began. Clearly, our audio team agrees with that sentiment. For those joining us for the first time, the Geneva Trade Week, which this event is the first session of, is our program of events in and around the WTO Public Forum. It's our attempt to make the week even more useful to those joining us both from Geneva and from around the world. We love being able to contribute to creative sessions, interesting sessions, and anything at all that can be a useful conversation this week, as so many of us are on the continent in the same place at the same time, which does not happen every month. You can find our full program of events at genevatradeweek.ch, and I know Caroline will speak a little bit about the other sessions that TESS has during the week as well. As always, I would encourage you all to reach out to us directly if you have any ideas for ways that you would like to work together with us to put on events, build products, and do anything as part of our 4 pillars of convening, informing, incubating, and empowering. Let me conclude my very brief remarks by thanking my team who have worked for weeks to put on events like this, the team at TESS, the Graduate Institute team, and the WTO Secretariat who have really worked closely with us on everything we're doing this week. Carolyn, I hand you over, and I hope that you can shepherd this session to conclusion. You have so many excellencies and experts to wrangle. Good luck. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Dmitry, for the very generous introduction, and a huge thanks to you and your team and all my team at TESS for enabling us to headline this opening session of Geneva Trade Week. So Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's really our honour to welcome you to this discussion today on how to enhance international cooperation at the WTO to drive action on the Paris climate goals in ways that support sustainable development priorities. For those of you not yet familiar with TESS, I launched TESS here at the Geneva Graduate Institute 3 years ago with the vision of a global trading system that addresses urgent environmental crises that we all face and at the same time that supports sustainable development priorities. So this event is part of our ongoing work on the climate crisis, where our goal is to foster inclusive international cooperation and action on trade and trade policies to advance climate mitigation and adaptation, climate resilient development, and fair transitions. And this connects to other work that we're doing on natural resources, on nature positive trade, and on food. So our daily work here in International Geneva and in this multilateral setting gives us a first-hand insight into the growing engagement of WTO members in discussions on trade, climate, and sustainability. Alongside, in our role as the Secretariat of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate, we clearly see the broad recognition among a diversity of governments of the need to enhance cooperation on climate. But we also know this is no easy task. Like all of you, we read every day about the tensions, the challenges, the competitiveness concerns, geopolitical and geoeconomic factors that all threaten the prospects of enhanced cooperation. We hear about a trust deficit, a widespread doubt about the ability of governments to agree on anything at all in a reasonable time frame at the WTO. And we also hear frustration from a range of stakeholders about what they see as a very slow bureaucratic pace of movement in the face of really urgent environmental crises. So I think that you're all very aware of the facts about our intensifying climate crisis. So we don't need to review them here, but we know that these impacts are economic, they're social, they impact our health. Climate crisis is hitting all societies, but especially the poorest and the most vulnerable. And it also does so in a way that undermines their sustainable development. So at TESS, our view is that the urgency of the climate crisis means we cannot afford to be cynical or pessimistic about the prospects of cooperation at the WTO. The message that we take away is we need to try harder. We need to work harder to identify where and how trade can support climate action, how to do so fairly, how to do so in a way that supports sustainable development priorities of all countries. And we think this recognizing all of the complexities of trade politics domestically and internationally, it's not an excuse for not trying harder. So in good news at TESS, we think there's potential for cooperation on trade. There's more potential on trade and climate than you see in the news headlines. We see a growing array of stakeholders and scholars presenting ideas and options for action. We see a growing number of proposals from a diversity of member states about prospects for cooperation, particular ways that they could work together. There's creative thinking on different kinds of outcomes, and there's also recognition that the trading system does not and should not operate in isolation. But at present, much of this discussion happens behind closed doors, informally and quietly, which is not a bad thing to start with because these issues are technical and they're complex. But what we hope to do today is to open a little bit of a window on the state of play at the WTO, to shed light on the perspectives and the initiatives and the engagement of members in trying to find ways forward. So what we want to focus on today is a proactive, forward-looking agenda on the nexus of trade, climate, and sustainable development. We've asked our speakers to reflect on pragmatic options and also unconventional thinking about what we could do to take this discussion forward. So we've shared 4 framing questions with all of our speakers. First, where does progress on the global climate agenda most require enhanced trade cooperation? Second, what are the greatest trade-related challenges frustrating climate action? And where are the trade-related needs arising from the impact of the climate crisis? How can these be addressed? Third, where are the greatest opportunities for trade cooperation to make a difference, and fast? And fourth, what kinds of concrete outcomes can be envisaged at the WTO, and what is required to make this happen? So you'll see that we have a full agenda today of speakers. We think this is a huge strength of this meeting because if we want to generate effective, inclusive international cooperation, we will need to hear from a diversity of actors and perspectives. We'll need leadership from a range of different parts of the WTO's membership. The number of ambassadors here today, both speaking and participating, is a really good signal of how there's growing recognition of the importance of this discussion. Now, we recognize we could easily have spent a whole day or full days on the topics for today, so we just have a short 90 minutes, but we think of it as an apéritif for the sort of banquet of meetings that we will undertake, many of you will undertake in different formats and different settings. So to kick us off today, I have asked, we will hear opening remarks from DDG Paugam, WTO Deputy Director General. I'm really delighted to welcome him because since his time in Geneva, first as Ambassador of France and now as DDG, he's really been a key champion of putting sustainability at the heart of the work of the WTO. And just before I turn to him, just to note that we've asked, except for Jean-Marie, who gets a little more time, everyone else will have 5 minutes. We have a wonderful bell that will be rung at 4. That's not to make you panic, just to know that you have 1 minute left, and then we'll ring it again at 5 minutes. So with no further ado, I'd love to turn the floor over to Jean-Marie. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Thank you for the privilege to be here. It's always good to come to this important discussion about trade and environment in Geneva. I want to dedicate a few minutes, Carolyn, to discuss about the questions that you have been raising on the overview of the broad overview of where the WTO is today on trade and sustainability. As you know, dear friends, while we are speaking today, the environment, the policies of transition toward a sustainable economy are already transforming trade flows and the trade capacities of nations. Nations engaged in trade are facing an upheaval in their comparative advantages. climate change alone has game-changing consequences for trade and the functioning of global value chains. Sustainable and pro-climate policies now tend to hold the upper ground against classical international trade and finance policies. And this transformation generates opportunities as well as threats for globalization. Of course, we at the WTO Secretariat are aiming for the best, that is, leveraging the opportunities from this transformation into a better and more inclusive globalization. This is the meaning of what we call re-globalization, a concept coined by our Director General, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, and which is also the theme of our public forum starting tomorrow. And here is where multilateral cooperation can make a difference for shaping the global future. As usual, there are two possible routes. One is upstream multilateral cooperation and coordination of policies. The other one is the spontaneous order resulting from market dynamics and individual sovereign policies. On the trade and environment nexus, the WTO has experience with both routes. It all started back in 2001 in Doha. The first route, that of multilateral cooperation, has been initiated then with the launch of negotiations for the reform of harmful fisheries subsidies. Those have lasted more than 20 years and really were accelerated when they were elevated to the level of a sustainable development goal in 2015. This negotiation has landed in 2022 with a first and historical agreement directing the elimination of subsidies to vessels practicing illegal or illicit fishing. We hope to soon see the entry into force of this agreement after an incredibly fast effort of ratification by WTO members. And we are 1 inch close to conclude the second chapter of this negotiation on subsidies contributing to the depletion of fish stocks. This agreement is the first of a kind within the WTO, since it is the first trade agreement to be motivated mostly by sustainability objectives. Yet, multilateral cooperation is not an easy path, and it can easily fail, which gives way to the other route. The second route is spontaneous evolution and order, which can sometimes be a result of blockages on the multilateral cooperation route. For instance, you will recall that at the same time when we launched the fisheries negotiation in Doha, we also launched 2 other negotiations aiming at enhancing mutual supportiveness between trade and the environment. One was for the liberalization of environmental goods and services, and the other one was for the clarification of the relation between WTO rules and specific trade obligations from the multilateral agreements on the environment. Long story short, these negotiations were abandoned, and their matters left for spontaneous evolution outside of the WTO. What happened? The liberalization of environmental goods and services has partially happened here and there, mainly through regional and bilateral trade initiatives. The multilateral environmental agreements and their trade components have been implemented within the framework of individual country measures. Their scope and magnitudes have greatly accelerated with the Paris Agreement on climate and the Convention on Biological Diversity. This happens outside of the WTO, and the result of these spontaneous dynamics are clearly suboptimal. It has become a major matter for concern for our members. Uncoordinated trade measures have a potential to restrict or fragment trade flows in a manner which can be detrimental both to trade objectives and to environmental objectives. Testimony of this concern can be heard almost every day now within the WTO. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly where we are at the time when we celebrate the 30th year of our multilateral trading system and contemplate this challenge of reglobalization. The cooperation route remains, but has not been used to move to action. It is up to our members to choose it and to engage in it. What would be the arguments for it? And I'd like to dedicate a few minutes on that. First, the why. Is it worth the effort? This question is, of course, very important because it holds the key to all the others. And the answer is yes. Rewards will be there, either under the form of public good or private benefits for the participants. there is a clear lesson that the history of the fisheries negotiation teaches us. Forget trying to negotiate trade concessions against environmental commitments. You are doomed to fail. Nobody has shown any intention of paying anything with agriculture, industry, or services for the preservation of fish. By definition, a public good cannot be bought, but it can be preserved through multilateral cooperation and equitable burden sharing. Here, there is a need to amend traditional WTO negotiating approach and tactics, whereby the objectives of the negotiation is to exchange concessions, trade or otherwise. To measure the benefits of engaging into cooperation, members must look at other types of rewards. Some key examples can be found in the recent trade agreements concluded in the WTO. Fish, the reward is clearly a public good. Domestic regulation services, the reward is trade facilitation. Investment facilitation for development, the reward is improved attractiveness of participants' economies. In none of these agreements is there any classical trade concession attached to the commitment taken. Members are taking these commitments out of self-interest because they believe it will strengthen the efficiency and attractiveness of their economies. The same thinking can and must apply exactly to sustainability. A green economy will be a better performing, more innovating, future-oriented, and attractive economy. Second question, the what? What is feasible? Today, things are quite ripe for answering this question. A considerable amount of technical work has been carried out over the last 3 years in the context of the 3 plurilateral dialogues within the WTO, namely the trade and environmental sustainability structure discussions, the plastics, and the fossil fuel subsidy reform initiatives. These dialogues have accumulated an incredibly rich mapping of the interactions between trade and the environment on a wide variety of subjects. External stakeholders have commendably contributed to this work, including in this room. Many practical trade measures have been identified that can be implemented without delay by every willing member. Third, the how to manage the political and legal risks of engaging into cooperation. You know that the WTO legal framework offers a full range of possibilities to adapt cooperation to the comfort zones and policy space of each member. The WTO framework can accommodate multilateral, plurilateral, regional, unilateral trade measures as long as they are not unduly restricting trade. It can accommodate soft law, hard law, transition period, opt-in, opt-out clause, and all types of flexibilities to provide comfort to members in adjusting their level of commitment. It can accommodate diverse sectoral preferences and appetite, and of course, special and differential treatment should they want to move faster on one issue rather than another. In a nutshell, the WTO can adapt to the diversity of situation entailed by environmental protection objectives. Therefore, one possible approach could be to negotiate a pool of various options to achieve the same environmental objectives and then use them for national pledges on a voluntary basis. Pledges taken together would represent then a valid multilateral outcome that testify for the efforts made and have domino effect on the others. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever happened in the field of multilateral cooperation, the economy and trade will be turning green. The question is whether the trade consequences of this transition will be optimized or left to the unknown. Over the last 2 years, this question and the perception of the risk of a global fragmentation has been underpinning close to 20 different members' proposals for starting new discussions in the WTO Committee of Trade and the Environment. This proposal seems to point all toward one same general objective, using the convening power of the WTO to find some sort of commonalities in environmental policy approaches so as to avoid unnecessary economic cost and to enhance environmental policy efficiency. As we walk our path to our future ministerial meeting in Cameroon, there is here a clear and concrete opportunity to walk our talk. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, I was addressing this same honorable audience, and then I tried to articulate my message by using a reference to an old Miles Davis tune entitled It's About That Time. I think I can update this today by referring to an even older jazz masterpiece from Charlie Parker, which is Now is the Time. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Jean-Marie, for an inspiring start. Three things that I took away is this idea of we don't need to think of deals being a quid pro quo and only about concessions, that we can think of having a positive self-interest in action, that the WTO has a range of different kinds of software for making decisions and different kinds of outcomes that could be generated. And also that you mentioned at the end that MC14 is now about 18 months away. So it's a nice target for everyone to think about what could be delivered at MC14 on these topics. So thank you for rousing us to action. So I'm going to turn now to our panel of experts. So we'll have the panel of experts and then it will be followed by our 8 ambassadors. We have 2 more coming, but they are just delayed at a meeting and will be with us shortly. So in terms of the experts, I'm so pleased to have a diverse range of experts, each of who's working in a national context. Often we tend to hear from international organizations about the prospects for cooperation, but I thought today it's interesting to hear from people who are operating in their national context and how they see that. So first up today, I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Manak, who is a fellow for trade policy at the Council on Foreign Relations in the US. She focuses and writes particularly on US trade policy and trade politics, but also on the wider range of public policy considerations in that context. So thank you, over to you.
Carolyn. First, let me just thank the organizers of Geneva Trade Week. Let me thank the organizers of Geneva Trade Week and TESS for bringing us together today to discuss this very important topic. I know it's not easy to throw one of these events together, especially this week. I've done it, especially with this team. So I'm going to say thank you to Dmitry and all who worked so hard to make this happen. So since I'm the only panelist from Washington, I'm guessing you'd expect me to start bringing down the mood after the DDG spoke on the progress on the trade and climate agenda and the lack of ambition for years to come. But I'm going to admit, first I found what he said very inspiring. But second, the trade landscape is shifting. And it's shifting towards a much greener future. And there are major opportunities for trade cooperation that should be seized without delay. So let me tell you about these and then provide some thoughts on the upcoming US election and how that, along with a lot of recent developments in US trade policy, are going to impact the nexus of trade and environment for years to come. So next month, the WTO will hold Trade and Environment Week. This is undoubtedly going to spur lots of discussions on this issue as well, and the conversation will need to grow beyond that, beyond just that conversation and behind those closed door meetings that Carolyn mentioned. I think that generally speaking, there are 3 things that I would say members really need to focus on going forward. And they may not seem, some of them may not seem that bold, but I think they're important. The first one, I would say, is to reinvigorate the work of the WTO committees, not just on trade and environment, but across the board. On the TBT committee, there's been a lot of work done on trade and environment, thematic discussions that have been really helpful to members. I think we need to expand this beyond TBT. SCM, I've been focusing a lot on the SCM committee, subsidy and countervailing measures. I think we need to have thematic discussions there as well, particularly on the nexus of industrial subsidies and climate, which are growing. Now, if we don't do it there, we should have a working group. We need to have a discussion about what all of these measures members are taking will do in real time outside of just our political discussions and how they'll impact activities beyond the border. Second, I think we really need to conclude the fish negotiations. We need to implement fish 100%, and we need to do it before the next MC. I think it's going to build the momentum to get fish 2 done. And we just need to be really committed to making this happen. I think nowhere is the need for responsible consensus more obvious than in the fish talks. And I think that members really need to take the holdouts to task on this privately and publicly to make that happen. And third, I think there's plenty of innovative work going on outside the halls of the WTO. I think we often tend to forget that sometimes. There are lots of regional initiatives, smaller bilateral initiatives that are advancing the agenda in positive ways. The acts that New Zealand is part of, I see Ambassador Kelly here, is one of those areas where I think we should evolve and think about how that works and maybe dock onto the WTO agenda, among other initiatives. All right, so that's all positive, I guess. And then let me tell you about the challenges. All of these initiatives, not just what I said, but what I think my panelists are going to say, all are going to face tremendous challenges. I don't really need to lay out for folks in this room what those challenges are at the WTO in particular. I think you all know them very well. But I would emphasize that members should not let progress be impeded by the antics of any single member, nor get bogged down by the overall WTO reform agenda. I think the sustainability and climate discussions have to march on. Now, there's not going to be any more grand bargains. I think we're pretty clear on that, but there's a lot of space for dedicated discussions on issues that we all care about. These are global public good issues that we need to advance in that way. I'm sorry, I'm going to go over time. So let me focus then on the discussions that we're having out in Washington and how they're all going to affect everybody else, because inevitably they do. And they're going to impact the workflow in some meaningful ways. Some of you heard maybe that we have an election coming up in November. Not that we haven't been talking about it incessantly since the last one, but it is kind of important, not just for the issue of trade. Two candidates, probably have heard a lot about them already, Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump. They haven't laid out specifics yet. I doubt that in their debate tomorrow, they're going to talk about non-populated PPMs or HTS codes. That's probably okay, and I'm fine with that. But I think we do understand the general message that they have on trade thus far. For Trump, trade is very, very transactional. And I think his return would take us back to much more aggressive unilateralism, far more than we saw in his first term. And he's going to use that to get leverage in lots of different negotiations. Target number one, no surprise, is going to be the European Union on many fronts, and we can talk about that in Q&A. Then there's Vice President Harris. She's made really well known how much she cares about climate and the centrality of climate to her personal policy agenda. She did not vote in favor of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which was a bipartisan trade agreement that got lots of support. And she said because it didn't have stringent environmental provisions in it. So I think that tells you a little about how she thinks about that. She's probably going to try to change that during the sunset review that happens in 2026. Now, I think she's also going to amplify and retain the White House's Climate Trade Task Force, which was created this year. That's another important area for discussions on this in Washington. And I think that could potentially invigorate US leadership in this area, which our partners should really seize on. Now, an important thing to keep in mind, and I'll wrap this up quickly, is to say that this is more than just the presidential contest. Congress is going to change, and Congress matters a lot for trade because, as the Constitution tells us, Congress is in charge of trade policy, though they tend to forget this. We're going to potentially have a 50-50 split in the Senate, and we're likely going to have Republicans have a retained majority in the House. I think that it's favoring them at the moment. What this means is that the legislative agenda is going to have to be bipartisan. What is bipartisan right now on trade and climate? Unfortunately, for a lot of folks, it's going to be a carbon tariff, most likely, without a domestic carbon tax. And we can talk about what that might look like as well. So I would say maybe there's a bit of doom and gloom in what happens in the United States, but there's a silver lining to all of this, is that the conversation on trade is now largely being driven by the climate agenda. I think that's positive, and we need to seize that not just post-November, but for many years to come, and keep engaging on this in productive ways. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Inu, and I hope that we can write up some of the rest of your presentation and also share it with others, because it's super insightful and really helpful to have that perspective. So now we're going to move across the ocean to Dr. Wang Huiyao, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. He's served as a counselor to China's State Council, a vice chairman of the China Association for International Economic Cooperation, and a range of other roles, both as a scholar and a policy advisor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Carolyn and DDJ and Your Excellencies and all the ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I think this is great. I mean, at Geneva Management Institute, I remember in 2019 we were here to start this, plastic pollution with Carolyn was really very fascinating. The Geneva Management Institute played a many leading role in terms of shaping a new narrative. What I'd like to talk about is that I think that we're all aware that climate has been a drastic challenge and the threat to the whole humanity that we're facing right now. I mean, we just see the unprecedented heat and the waves and disasters, floods in 2024 again. So this is really so obvious. Yet we are so falling a shortage of meeting the challenges. Particularly, I think I would like to highlight the green trade that we actually have to really promote. For example, the green trade has maintained steady growth overall. For example, from 2013 to 2022, the average annual growth of the green trade import and export was 0.85%, reaching $6.5 trillion US dollars. And in the first 3 quarters of 2023. So this scale of green trade has been basically fluctuated the same with the global merchandise trade. And it's share consistently between 20 and 23%. So we're seeing that green trade has been increasing, but then we're not really seeing that make more robust and a big way. And China actually is leading in that green trade. China's green trade import and export reached 1.07 trillion, account about 12% global total. So this is a good sign that China is doing that. But actually, we're far short of meeting the challenges. Actually, for example, let's consider the solar panel market, which presents an immense growth opportunity. The International Energy Agency project that global demand for the new photovoltaic installation will reach 820 gigawatts, a figure 4 times greater than that of 2022. So we're actually far short of that. So this is the indication that we have enormous opportunities. And again, similarly on the EV electric vehicles market is undergoing exponential growth. And in 2023, global EV sales surged by 35% year on year, and projections suggest that by 2027, sales will reach 30 million vehicles worldwide. So we're still far from the global demand, and then there's a big green spending that by IEA also projects we should spend 4.5 trillion, but so far we have only spent 1.8 trillion. So there's a huge deficit for this global green trade. So, given the time, what I'd like to really call for at this meeting is that let's build up some consensus. First, the climate crisis is worsening, and we really need to put our acts together, all the countries. So the green trade is really the new trend. We have to really emphasize that. So I would like to call down that perhaps we should establish a new green trade mechanism to facilitate and promoting the global green trade. So this is really what we need actually. And also second, I think we should really abandon these geopolitical narratives on the green trade. For example, we talk about China is always there's overcapacity or there's over supply of the green product. But actually, when you think about what happened in Germany, export 80% of its vehicles, Japan 50% of vehicles, and China only 12% of the EV. So it's far from what has Boeing and Airbus never have the problem of overcapacity. Why now we're combating the green challenge? There's a overcapacity issue. So I think we should probably stop this kind of global negative narrative on green trade. And thirdly, I think that technology transfer is important. On green technology transfer, we should probably expand on that. And China, US, EU, and everybody can work together. And fourthly, I think the investment of green project should be encouraged. We should really encourage more investment, EV establishment, manufacturing and clean energy product. So all those things are really important. So finally, to conclude that, I think we probably really to shape a new narrative. This is common sense. We are far short of a green product supply. Why we are really restrict each other on that? So, or really using other alternatives. So just to say that we Paris Agreement is not far from meeting the challenge. We are also a few years left for the SDG 2030. So it's high time that we all work together, really at this juncture, that put a new proposal initiative on the green trade and facilitate green trade and liberalize green trade and promote green trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang, and also for putting some very concrete ideas on the table around some of the opportunities to promote and benefit from green trade, and this idea of a more positive narrative about the potential for cooperation. So I'm going to turn directly now to Ignacio Bercero, who is joining us online from Brussels. We're delighted to have him. Many of you know Ignacio very well as a former director in DG Trade, the European Commission. He's now retired, so he can give us his independent reflections, which I'm really looking forward to on this topic. Ignacio, over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Carolyn, and thanks a lot for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, although it would have been even nicer to be able to be there to have conversations after the event. Now, as you have said, I'm no longer speaking for the European Commission. So what I would like to do is to share with all of you some personal reflections about what could be a WTO agenda on trade and climate between now and the next ministerial meeting. And I will be unconventional in the sense that despite the very disappointing outcome of MC13, I think it is possible to envisage a high level of ambition, but at the same time, I will be pragmatic, because as Jean-Marie has very rightly said, you really need to be able to use the great variety of tools which are available in the WTO. You can negotiate multilaterally, you can negotiate plurilaterally, you can aim for legally binding outcomes, you can aim for non-legally binding outcomes. And I think creativity is going to be necessary if one is going to be able to develop a meaningful trade and climate agenda in the WTO. I think that from my point of view, this agenda needs to tackle the three core issues of the trade and climate interface. That is to say, border carbon measures, the impact of subsidies both on trade and climate, and thirdly, measures to facilitate trade and investment on green goods. So the question is on each of those issues, what it is that is doable within the framework of the WTO. Now, when it comes to border carbon measures, I think it has been very useful that you have had very intensive discussions in the Committee on Trade and Environment. And this transparency function is going to continue to be critical, because quite clearly a lot is going to happen. And what Inu said, Signia, that all kinds of different developments can take place in this space over the next years. I think transparency is going to continue to be critical. But I think one needs to really go beyond the transparency. And I believe in particular there's one issue which is really critical to avoid fragmentation, and which I'm really quite disappointed that there has been no agreement to have this topic as a structured issue for discussion in the Committee on Trade and Environment, and that is the question of methodologies for carbon accounting. I think ideally one would wish to see where it is possible to have a common methodology for carbon accounting. This might not be possible, but at least you would want to have a situation where there is no incompatibility between the different methodologies which are being used. You also want to have a discussion about how to simplify the information that needs to be provided by companies in order to fulfill the carbon accounting requirements. You want to talk about systems of verification. You want to talk about default values. Very important decisions on all these questions are going to be taken in many jurisdictions over the future. And I think it's really important that that conversation also takes in an illustrated manner in the WTO. So that's one first suggestion for me about what could be done in the WTO in terms of trade and climate. Now, second big challenge is, of course, subsidies. And you really need to look into subsidies both from the point of view of the impact on trade and on the impact on climate. There, where I know that Inu has been doing a lot of thinking on this, and I think that I had opportunities to discuss with her. What I would suggest is that what we really need to have on this issue is a bit of an off-campus analytical discussion, which should be possible to bring in as much as possible also of external expertise in the WTO. This cannot be a technical kind of conversation in the Committee on Subsidies. It really needs to be a conversation that brings as much external expertise as possible. It is an issue on which a lot of work is being done, probably in a more informal type of setting. And I think it's going to be important to start the conversation from an analytical point of view. Only when you have done enough analysis, you can decide whether or not it makes sense and whether it's the appetite to negotiate in the WTO. Now, I see I only have 1 minute, so then I will come to the last of my suggestions, which has to be what can be done in the WTO to facilitate trade and investment on green goods. And I think, in my view, we need to take a different approach to the one that we took in IGA. That's not going to work. I think, in my view, we need to have something which is both more narrow and broader. More narrow in terms of the objectives, but broader in terms of the tools that you want to pursue to achieve that objective. My sense is that the objective that could be particularly useful for the WTO to discuss at this point in time is how trade policy can facilitate decarbonization in developing countries. And this has different dimensions. There is the questions relating to facilitated investment in renewable energies. There is the issues relating to how to promote better integration in green value chain. And there are issues about how to facilitate compliance with border carbon measures. And the best way to tackle those issues, I'm very attracted to the idea that Jean-Marie presented in the beginning. Each member who is participating in the discussion has to be thinking about how it can contribute towards these objectives, maybe through voluntary pledges, and then try to bring all of these elements together in an inclusive conversation. I think time is up. I will stop now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ignacio, also for some very concrete suggestions. And I can also see a theme coming up here about the idea that we're trying to deal with some common public policy objectives requiring a different way of thinking about doing business and a new approach to some of the old issues at hand. I'm going to move swiftly now to Yves Remy, who is the director of the Shridath Ramphal Centre for International Trade, Law, Policy and Services at the University of West Indies. And many of you will also know of her as the co-lead of the Remaking Global Trade for a Sustainable Future project. Over to you, Yves.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. True to the archetypal expectations, as Inu's mentioned, you're going to expect me to talk about climate vulnerability and small island developing states and challenges based on our climatic vulnerability to all of the hurricanes that we're facing, but I'm not going to satisfy your expectations. Today, for this high-level event, I want to use precious 5 minutes to focus light on processes and the ground game. And that is deepening cooperation on climate by strengthening connection between global discussions and frameworks and local realities and communities. And by communities, I mean not just the NGOs and civil society, but equally the knowledge, epistemic, and content-based communities in parts of the world where I come from. And I do this having been part of both this high-level community in Geneva, as well as now working in research and advocacy in the Caribbean, and having spent the last 2 years working in the Remaking Trade project with communities on sustainability and trade. So TESS has been pivotal in advancing and broadening the conversation on trade and climate. And let me just register my sincere gratitude to the foresight that TESS has shown in bringing persons like myself from academic communities back into the conversations. But I can now say with a relative amount of clarity that there is a risk in this cooperative spirit of creating a new divide, if we cannot and are not more intentional about bridging the gaps between high-level dialogues here in Geneva and lived experiences on the ground within and across communities. And why does this matter for trade cooperation writ large? It matters especially for communities in developing countries that don't necessarily have easy access and entry points into some of these international discussions. And there are two real reasons that I've encountered in missing out on these voices. The first is we miss the privilege of a textured, nuanced positions that risk leaving important constituencies behind. As we design global frameworks for trade and climate, we have to ensure they reflect what the needs of the communities most impacted are. And it hit me most during a CBAM stakeholder workshop in Trinidad and Tobago this year, the first of its kind in the region, organized by IISD with the University of the West Indies, when I was sitting next to a local lawyer who had to undertake the task for her company of calculating how the CBAM's default values would impact the cost of the fertilizer being exported into the EU market, and the very real risk that investors in Trinidad would relocate outside of the region. Dealing with that measure, but understanding it from that company, societal, business decision perspective, clarified for me just how to tackle research on just transitions that are relevant to Caribbean realities, and bringing that research perspective back into conversations like this. There's a second risk that we create by leaving these voices are, and we risk misaligning priorities and fragmenting instead of simplifying solutions. So trade and climate can become bogged down in layers of bureaucracy, technicality, especially when they're disconnected from those in the regions we serve who are tasked with implementing them. Again, experience. I sat in on a meeting with a person in the region responsible for creating nationally determined contributions. When I gave her my research on trade, she said, well, join the line. There are people from the gender community, health community, blue oceans communities who want us to align our NDCs with their goals. We're not looking at it from their perspective. How do we bring these different communities together to simplify rather than make their work harder? And so for me, in my last 45 seconds, I see three ways we can enhance that level of trade cooperation, not just at this level, but at that level as well. We have to leverage our convening power to build lasting linkages. So TESS plays a key role, bringing me in on a conversation with other regional experts to help inform discussions. Likewise, IISD did this with the UE CBAM workshop I mentioned. Second, we have to create spaces for the lead voices in our communities to represent their interests themselves. There's no substitute for the authenticity of persons who have to implement or persons who are impacted by the climate disasters to make their own voices heard. And third, we need to adopt some humility and some discernment, knowing when to step back and knowing when to lead. And by that, I mean, trade cooperation requires that local actors who know what they need best should be the ones to tell us what they need, and we are responsive to their needs. But in turn, we need to help them articulate their positions in these types of spaces because we understand these dynamics equally well as well. So in conclusion, I would suggest that the process is as much as the technical, very erudite discussions we're having here, because we run a risk of cooperation happening up there, but the bridge actually growing between these discussions and what's happening on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Yaniv. I'm not going to try to summarize a key point because I think you were perfectly clear about the importance of consultation and of listening to the voices that know best about how they are affected by this crisis and what they need in terms of trade cooperation. So I'm going to close out our expert session now by turning to Bernice Lee, who is a Hoffman Distinguished Fellow at Chatham House, in the UK. She's an acknowledged expert on the politics of climate change, innovation for sustainability, international trade, and also China. She's a member of a great array of expert bodies and steering committees and so on, issues of cooperation on climate and on energy transition. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today, Bernice.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and also really sorry to cancel here because I had an appointment this morning, and in London, when the NHS says you have an appointment, you show up. So this also means that I had some labbing a couple of hours ago. So if I use even more funny metaphors than I normally, you have to forgive me. However, it is a serious matter when it comes to matters of climate emergency. I've already heard as well. There is a lot of sound here. I wonder whether or not it's possible to reduce the ruffling so that I feel less distracted. Thank you very much, technician. We have on an all hands on deck moment when it comes to climate action. It is, as we know, about emissions reduction, but about also increasingly going to be about removal. But also there is clearly a clock on all of this, which is why speed and scale is of the essence. We also know that it is about adapting to the new realities of a climate changed world, which is not only changing daily life as you know it, but also changing trade patterns and trade in general, trade-related dynamics around the world as well. Now, knowing all of this is the reminder of how globalization 1.0 have helped in terms of enabling the flow of technologies, goods, services, and as well as peoples, perhaps, that could best help deliver these multiple and urgent climate imperatives. However, looking at the incentive infrastructure and architecture today, increasingly it is clear that all hands on deck also means that trade has to play an increasingly important role in terms of how it will help shape reduce costs as mentioned, but also looking at questions around, many people have already mentioned, subsidies and industrial policy, for example. But of course, knowing that we're not in Kansas anymore in the world of globalization 2.0, we of course have to rethink what it means to have trade as part and parcel of the solution. We know that, for example, that competition and geopolitics is clearly going to be a component of any future incentive structure. It is okay that this is the case because this is the world we live in. But whether or not we want the WTO to be the ultimate empire, and the question is whether it ever was the ultimate empire anyway or not, the question is if governments don't want to come together in the way that it used to do and go to the WTO to register their marriage, in this world of possibly conscious uncoupling by many different parties, the question is whether or not any institutions, including the WTO for one, but there are many others as well, could become the sort of separation counselor that could help reduce debt, stress as the global economy reshape itself around potentially different groupings, but also around different units of production and trade as well. And at the same time, of course, even though we know that maybe is no longer the place where marriages get registered in the way it used to, whether only could become a sort of dating platform for different types of liaison, different types of cooperative framework in such a way that enable the multiplicity of needs that we know we will need in order to facilitate the different kinds of cooperation that we need for the future. So if cooperation is less assumption, but definitely in some ways unconventional but needed, the question is whether or not institutions like the WTO and others could help facilitate these multiple different types of arrangements. But also it means going back to basics, because going basics means that if we can't imagine a world where we have this kind of really comprehensive, amazing agreement that deals with everything anymore, going back to basics will mean that we have to make sure that things that have no shortcuts, I think Yves mentioned the question about consultation, time, etc. All of these are going to be important components for any progress for the future. And I also want to sort of underscore the point that Ignacio just made, which I very much agree with, and I was going to be my main point, so thanks for making it divided, which is that if we can't imagine a world where we necessarily have one standard or one single criteria, the question is whether or not we can make sure that they could be interoperable in such a way that even though they may not be one market, even if we have a world with multiple markets, at least companies don't have to produce for different standards and different stuff in such a way that would in fact increase cost, because if indeed reducing cost and increasing scale is the important part of climate, meeting different kinds of climate objectives, then the question is whether or not there could be forum for ensuring interoperability and how we re-globalize in such a way, especially as we all know, we are not just talking about re-globalization as we used to know it, but also a question of whether or not the new changing of the guards with new leaders who are likely to be the pusher of further trade globally will be willing to be the leader in a way that really demonstrate what it means to enable multiple markets to actually function in a way as sustainable and as broadly as it could as well. So with that, I do think that my laughing gas is actually making an impact, because I was talking about the WTO being a marriage counselor on the decline. But at the same time, whether or not we want something like the WTO or not, the question is that these functions remain important, that we need to make sure that we are, as we create the new, as we move to the next generation of solutions, it is more important than ever that we look at a world where there are interoperable systems, but also a world where it is possible to imagine a place where stresses could be reduced. Thank you very much for your time, and what an honor as always, and good luck, and I look forward to hearing what all the great and the good in Geneva would have for the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernice, and another one who is encouraging us to think differently about the kinds of solutions and discussions that could be had in the WTO and the multiple services, the multiple ways in which cooperation can be advanced in that context. I like the allusion to a marriage counselor, a dating platform to enable countries to cooperate more effectively through different ways. So with this, we finished our expert panel. We now have the privilege of hearing from 8 ambassadors here in Geneva. I'm really delighted that we have such a diverse group, because for me it tells a story about how seriously the issue of climate cooperation is taken by a broad diversity of members from very different regions and national contexts, recognizing that there is something here that needs to be addressed. So I'm really delighted to have all of you here. I'm going to say very little between your remarks because I don't want to run out of time. So I'm just going to go swiftly from one to the other, starting first with His Excellency James Baxter, who is the Australian Ambassador to the WTO.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks really to the organisers for this event. It's a terrific way to start the week, and really an enormous thanks to all the experts. I've got a list of about 30 ideas that will take me the rest of my life to implement, but I do think that shows that there is enormous potential for us in this area, and the opportunity is there if we want to take it. I suppose from my point of view as a WTO ambassador, we know that we are expected to help our governments tackle the important environmental challenges they're facing individually and collectively, and that is a core part of our job. At the same time, we as WTO ambassadors can help our governments tackle these problems in ways that don't undermine the trade prospects of all of our economies. Our governments don't want to cut off trade unnecessarily. They don't want other governments developing measures that unduly restrict their economic opportunities. We can help them find that balance, and that's something that I think we must try to do. And I think the collective of countries and experts that we have around the table this afternoon is testament to the level of interest in doing that. From Australia's point of view, really a few things that we would register as important areas for cooperation here, a couple of which have already come up. One is the interoperability of trade measures used for climate action. Certainly that's something that we're seeing an increased appetite for as important measures such as the EU's CBAM begin to come into sharp focus. That's a real opportunity for us. I think developing cooperative and trade supportive approaches to carbon leakage more broadly is something where we've seen increased interest. And that's something, I think Jean-Marie mentioned both of those areas. One area that we would also identify is the need to address the harmful environmental impact of agricultural subsidies. Maybe if I can just expand on that one a little bit more, because we haven't discussed it yet this afternoon, the need to put agriculture on an environmentally sustainable footing is becoming more urgent. We can't ignore the mounting evidence we're seeing that's been recognised by increasingly by international organisations that a significant share of trade distorting domestic support for agriculture is environmentally damaging and is increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And we believe that agricultural trade reform, substantial agricultural trade reform, is going to be essential to supporting environmental sustainability and sustainable development needs of all members. I might just move on from that, as I think we've heard a lot about the need for interoperability of emissions methodologies and the like. In terms of what we have been trying to do to promote progress, we're participating in the TESS, the Trade and Environmental Sustainability Structured Discussions, and we're also, along with China and some others, a coordinator of the WTO dialogue on plastics pollution. And I think the diversity of the membership in that initiative, again, is testament to the potential for cooperation in this area. And of course, we're also a member of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. In addition to that, in the interests of promoting a just transition, we're very proud to be supporting leading sustainable development research organisations in Geneva with $2 million in funding to help countries in our region, some of whom are here today, to advance their trade and climate development priorities through trade. Moving on, look, a crucial step is going to be promoting dialogue, and we've heard a lot this afternoon from Geneva. I think really had some terrific things to say at the level of bridging the gap between high-level dialogues and community-level needs and demands and expectations. But also, I think we've heard a lot, and indeed this discussion this afternoon is an example of the sort of the model of discussion that we need to have. If the WTO is to be part of a coherent solution, then we need to be talking to other organisations who are working on these issues more broadly, whether they're formal intergovernmental international organisations, whether they're informal stakeholder groups. That's what we need to be doing more of. And we need, those of us who have the means to, need to be helping that through supporting further research. And that's something we're trying to do at the moment, including through funding organisations such as the OECD, the IUCN, and indeed TESS itself. So we look forward to working with you and others over the coming months, and also to the discussion this afternoon, this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Baxter. I'll now move directly to His Excellency Matthew Wilson, who's the Ambassador of Barbados to the WTO and all of the international organizations in Geneva. So he has a uniquely huge job.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. And apologies for Nella and I coming in late. Nella was just handing over the coordination of the ACP to me for the next year. So Nella is the happiest she's ever been in a year, and I'm the most nervous I've ever been in a year. So I missed all of the discussions, so my apologies. But I would say, just from a personal perspective, I love seeing Yves here because it's important that we have academics and thinkers from small island developing states discussing these issues. Far too often, you have discussions about the global south or the global majority without policymakers and academics from those countries involved. So commendations. And clearly, I mean, if you look at where the discussion is today versus where it was even 5 years ago, you know, we're no longer discussing whether or not trade policy has a role to play in dealing with climate change and climate adaptation and mitigation. I think is pretty much acknowledged. So that for me is a huge step that we should not underestimate, having been able to get to this point. Right now, of course, I think we need to get a little bit more granular on exactly what it needs to do and exactly how it can do it, and the role that the WTO in particular can play. We just had Dr. Ngozi at our ACP coordination meeting, and she very much emphasized the need for ACP countries to do a little bit more on sustainability issues, on the green transition, not just in terms of demandeurs, but also because we have things to offer based on our natural endowments, based on our productivity, based on our human capital, that we need to be a little bit more involved in these issues. So for me, if you look at where the WTO is right now, I think that, and I'm glad Holim is here, we need to continue to do more to make the CTE more effective. And that also means really having a pathway to transfer some of the excellent discussions that we're having in TESS into this multilateral platform of the CTE. That's something that we need to focus on. We need to take another look at environmental goods and services in a real way to see, you know, exactly what is on the table and how can we make this work for the reality today. And I know this isn't popular, but I don't mind. We need to take a look at the existing trade rules and the SEM and the TRIMs to decide, are they fit for purpose for what we need to do in the 21st century? Are they really fit for purpose to fully embrace the circular economy? And here, I think the WTO has an important role to play in doing better at defining what a modern green subsidy is. And that, for me, should be central of what we do moving forward. We need continued transparency, especially around a lot of these regulations that are happening. And I think it's really good that we're having these information sessions in the WTO. But let us be clear, a lot of these new climate-related regulations have unplanned, and some of them planned, negative implications for developing country MSMEs in particular. And I think we need to dig down a little bit more into what these implications are going to be and how we can support developing country MSMEs to be able to meet some of these new regulations. And of course, we need siloed deconstruction. And this is why I think the work that you guys are doing is so important, why the work of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate is so important. But we have a lot of challenges that we need to address. We need to look at access to knowledge, access to appropriate technology and expertise that would allow actual implementation and sustainability of climate smart initiatives. So it's one thing to have access to climate smart technology, it's another thing to be able to maintain and implement them and for it to be sustainable. And this is a huge problem that many developing countries have. Fine, give us the access to the technology, but a lot of us don't have access to the know-how to make sure that it works the way that it should actually work. And for small countries, I mean, we are struggling with understanding some of these new rules on the horizon. On CBAM, digital product passports, very nervous about that, if I'm honest with you, and many more. And a lot of us are stuck in the middle of these tariff wars. Whenever I see this country is putting tariffs on these EVs and that one is doing this, all I'm thinking is, oh, none of us in the developing world have the possibility to manufacture and produce these EVs and these components. And when you have these tariff wars, the only one it really impacts on ultimately is those of us who need access to them to be able to really incorporate it into the green transition. But then, of course, there's the big F, which is financing. Don't worry, financing. Now, this is not the WTO's responsibility, but WTO does, I think, have a role to play in having more of a voice and advocating for appropriate financing. And this is why the Bridgetown Initiative from Barbados and many other like-minded countries, I think, is so fundamental. And one last point, the Bridgetown Initiative is now in its 3.0 iteration, where you also focus a bit more on private sector contributing and also philanthropy also contributing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthew. A great list of, a great set of proposals as well. I'm going to move swiftly now to Ambassador Li who represents the permanent representative of China to the WTO.
Thank you, Carolyn. And also thank all the experts share their insightful views. I like the keywords of today's event: pragmatic, unconventional. Actually, we are facing the unconventional crisis, and challenges need unconventional thinking and actions. People understand global crisis, global challenges need global cooperation and global responses. So currently, I think the protectionism and the fragmentation are the biggest threats for our green transition. Of course, we also believe trade aid should be and is part of the solution for us to tackle the climate change. And in WTO, it is encouraging that members are having active discussion at the Committee of Trade and Environment, and other plurilateral initiatives such as TESS, DDP. China is part of the whole efforts. We are one of the coordinators of the dialogue on plastic pollution. We submitted 4 proposals to the CTE in the past 2 years, calling for more deliberation on the trade-related climate measures. Members' collective efforts in recent years have set the stage for potential actions at the WTO. Some of them already mentioned by the DDG, by Mr. Wang. I just want to repeat. First, enhanced cooperation on the liberalization and facilitation of clean energy goods, service, or technologies. Second, enhanced cooperation to promote the coherence and interoperability of trade-related trade measures, such as carbon standards, requirements, and carbon emission measurement methodologies. WTO could play a role in promoting harmonization and mutual recognition of those measures. Third, enhanced cooperation to maintain resilient and stable green supply chain. Fourth, enhanced cooperation to stimulate more investments in clean energy industries. We have IFD agreement, investment for facilitation and development agreement, as an important instrument in our hand. If this agreement, with wide support from now 128 members, could successfully be incorporated in the WTO framework, it would play a role in promoting global investment in clean energy industries, especially in developing members. Besides those, we can think even bigger. For example, could we create stronger linkage between trade aspects and members' NDCs and the Paris Agreement? Could we discuss to bring back the non-actionable subsidy in the ASM so that members could have more tools to promote sustainable and green development? Could we consider developing a global methodology for carbon pricing, as DG Ngozi mentioned? Could we consider better using aid for trade initiatives to support members' climate efforts? Having said all the above, the last question goes to how we make it happen. Everyone knows in WTO, the most difficult thing is deliver. We talk a lot, we talk too much, but we cannot deliver as outside expectation. So I just want to share some unconventional thinking. First, we need to change mindset by providing public product that benefits all. Our discussions on the potential actions here at the WTO are for all people, not just my people. Second, we need to be innovative in approaches to reach consensus on collective actions. For example, everyone knows in WTO the phase 2, and also the incorporation of the IFD agreement. Only very limited number of members cannot join the consensus. So can we explore more innovative approach to try to accommodate the differences of the different members? Then we can deliver more. To conclude, I will share Mr. Deng Xiaoping's very famous saying, no matter whether the cat is black, is white or black, as long as it can catch mice, it is good cat. So let's do it. Together we can deliver. Thank you.
Thank you also to Ambassador Lee for another great set of concrete suggestions and pragmatic options, and also bigger thinking about ways forward. I'm going to turn directly now to Her Excellency Clare Kelly, who's the Ambassador of New Zealand to the WTO.
Thank you, Caroline. It's an absolute pleasure to be here at this brilliant conversation, and I'm going to focus very briefly on New Zealand perspectives on two of the questions that you asked, the opportunities for trade cooperation and associated concrete outcomes in the WTO that will make a substantial, meaningful contribution, we believe, to climate change mitigation. In doing so, we don't underestimate in any way the challenges because they are enormous. But for New Zealand, focusing on what we can do about it ourselves and with groups of like-minded countries is key to not letting the scale of the problem paralyse or overwhelm. And so we're also very conscious that the WTO and trade-related policies and tools are only part of the equation. There's an enormous amount of important work being done nationally, regionally, and in other bodies, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, that are obviously hugely important to reaching the answers. But we do strongly believe that trade policies and trade tools, including the kinds of frameworks and processes to support action that the WTO provides, and which do provide such a range of flexibilities and options, have a real role to play here. And in terms of what that role should be and what those outcomes should be, I mean, as many others have mentioned today, ratifying the first fish agreement, concluding and bringing into force the second fish agreement is absolutely key. The second agreement in particular delivers, well, three huge benefits: tackling the central problem of overcapacity and overfishing, and also centralising that notion of sustainability at the heart of a WTO agreement, and perhaps building more on that idea of a modern trade agreement that does not just depend on the exchange of concessions, but also doing so in a way that provides appropriate special and differential treatment for developing countries, small-scale fishing communities. Equally, I really liked Matthew's suggestion of modern green subsidies. How do we work out what those are? And New Zealand can't get away from that, including substantial, meaningful agricultural trade reform, looking to reduce and remove trade distorting agricultural subsidies to mitigate the environmentally harmful effects that many of those subsidies have. There's the extraordinarily important development component of that work in order to enable developing countries to exploit their own competitive advantage in agriculture. But we think it just doesn't make sense to attempt to address green subsidies without rolling up our sleeves and getting into agriculture, no matter how painful and difficult it is. But it must not take another 20 years. So rely on New Zealand to keep hammering away on that one. Similarly, we've put a lot of effort into harnessing the frameworks and institutions of the WTO to help advance fossil fuel subsidy reform. And we've been really grateful for the commitment and buy-in of TESS and other groups in that regard, to look at the ways in which governments can free up funds that they're currently putting into fossil fuel subsidy to support wider social and developmental objectives, including green energy transitions. I also couldn't agree more with Matthew. Making environmental goods, services and technologies more readily available at more affordable prices through liberalisation and facilitation is a key component here. And a particular New Zealand contribution, we believe, in this regard is the trailblazer agreements that smaller groups of countries can contribute. I think it was Inu who mentioned the range of work that's being done outside the WTO, and she referred in particular to the ACTS agreement. And that agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability, it's got 4 members at the moment, but that is a start. And it does incorporate specific concrete trade actions in respect of environmental goods, environmental subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies, and eco-labelling. The ACTS members are looking forward to sharing this agreement, more details of the agreement with other WTO members once it's been signed in October. And we're keen to look at how the outcomes under the ACTS, whether they can be helpful to addressing these wider issues on a broader scale at the WTO, which we believe they are. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ambassador Kelly. I think you recall right at the beginning, Dmitry said that I had a hard job ahead of me to make sure we finish here on time today. So he has kindly granted us an extra 10 minutes to close, which I hope you all stay for because it's such a rich and important discussion that we're having today. We still have 4 more ambassadors to hear from, and I don't wish to rush them. So if you have to leave, then of course I understand, but I think it would be much better if everyone could stay if possible. So I'm going to turn now to His Excellency Ambassador Hussain, who's the permanent representative of Pakistan to the WTO.
Thank you, Carolyn. I've actually turned on my timer. So first of all, I would like to congratulate you and your team on organizing this session and all the previous sessions that I had the honor to attend. There are a lot of insightful discussions that can happen outside the WTO and not in the CTE. The biggest opportunity, and a lot of my colleagues had fantastic points, and also the experts came with some innovative ideas. We all know multilateralism is the key, and the biggest opportunity is on the multilateral agreements on which we are currently working. But unfortunately, if you look at the outcome document of MC13, the word environment doesn't appear in that whole document. So in fact, at the WTO, we don't have any ministerial mandate as of now to discuss environment, which is unfortunate because there should be, because it affects everybody. And coming from a country which has not contributed to the problem, but is one of a major sufferer of the impact of environment. So what we can do, I believe there are some things which can be done within WTO, some outside. I think inclusion of renewable products and environmentally sound products within the regional trade agreements and the free trade agreements could open up an opportunity for eventual multilateral inclusion. That's first. I think standard harmonization is another aspect that can help, especially with respect to whether it's the carbon accounting, whether it's the pricing, whether it's the standards of different products. And that's something that could be done at the WTO and would be not controversial, hopefully. I think so, is agreeing on standards. The third thing, we see there's a disconnect within the countries between the climate ministries and the trade ministries. It's very important for them to come together. Now, in that context, one key role that WTO can play is develop stronger partnership with other institutions, specifically UNFCCC. Because that would help us to adopt some of the principles that we have agreed in UNFCCC. But when we come to WTO, we say, well, let's not talk about these principles, which is polluters pay principle and the common but differentiated responsibility. That doesn't work, because if we agree something there and we are not agreeing here and we are not agreeing on same set of principles, then there is a certain level of mistrust among the developing countries, especially those affected by environment. The third aspect, which would be critical and already mentioned by my colleague Matthew with respect to finance, is to make the finance available. I would say there's a lot of funding already available. Is it being used? It's not being used optimally, and the reason it's not being used is because of some of the processes. For example, in the climate funds, which work at the global level, it's extremely difficult to access that funding. Even that funding is available. So that's unfortunate that we are not using the available resources. The next is the unilateral measures impact global trade. It's the multilateralism that's going to work. And then there are unintended consequences of some of these unilateral measures. Everybody has talked about the carbon border mechanism, but there are others, such as waste regulations. And when we apply them to textile, and when we apply them to used textile, because at times the used textile is eventually being refurbished and used, which means it's not contributing to the environmental problem, rather reducing it. Then aid for trade is a very important platform. I think there can be a dedicated window within the WTO aid for trade, which is on climate focused, specifically on climate. Access of technology. And we are not asking for just simple transfer of technology because there are financial benefits involved. So we would be looking at investments. Investments for production of environmental goods in countries which are adversely affected by an environment that would help them not only to mitigate the climate impact, but also it will help them to become an important player in the global trade. And finally, increased protectionism is not going to help us get anywhere. And we need to focus on the sectors which are contributing the most. The first, it starts with energy, which means solar panels, wind turbines. The second is transportation, which means EVs. So if we are not focusing on that, then we are missing out on those two sectors which are contributing majorly to environment. And I agree on the huge amount of environmental agri subsidies which are being given by some of the members, which are contributing also to environmental issues. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'll shift swiftly now to Ambassador Raul Cano-Ricciardi, who is the permanent representative of Paraguay to the WTO.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you very much for the organizing this event. As my predecessor has mentioned, outside discussion of WTO is more important sometimes than it's what is discussing within the WTO. You will hear my view as a landlocked development country from Latin America. How can we are facing the climate change and the climate change which is in crisis? Sustainable development, protection and preservation of the environment are fundamental goals of the WTO, which are enshrined in the Marrakech Agreement. The nexus of trade and sustainable development and international trade can make a positive contribution in achieving the United Nations 2030 agenda and its SDGs, responding to the global environmental crisis. I want to stress that WTO mandate is consistent with the members' responsibility as well as the respective need and concern at different levels of economic development. We want to highlight that sustainable development must include the three pillars: economic, social, and environment, and we don't have to lose focus on the three pillars as a whole. Trade is horizontal and has a direct impact on all dimensions, but for smaller economies, the social and economic dimension are key issues to take into consideration. Without considering the social and economic dimension, climate action will not be sustainable and climate benefit will last. We need to increase and improve trade in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind. Positive trade incentives are key tool to sustainable development. Multilateral environmental agreement principle must be considered in trade discussion and vice versa, as most of my predecessor has been raised. Breaking barrier in which both regimes operate is key. Mutual supportiveness and harmonized application of international instruments such as MIAs and WTO agreement are fundamental. WTO rules is not to be read in a clinical isolation from the public international law. Trade-related environmental measures and policies, due to the hybrid nature, must simultaneously respond to a multiple set of principles and parameters recognized by international environmental. We want to stress that equity, common but differentiated responsibility, and respective capability is key. Unilateral trade-related environmental measure taken by some WTO member has a high impact on trade. Agriculture is a key sector in which can have a positive impact on climate and contributed in a way to sustainable development, but also being harmed by climate change. Agriculture is very sensitive for all of the countries, all of the WTO members, but especially for LDCs and developing country, and as well from LLDCs. Trade and environmental measure can be best contribute to sustainable development, including environmental sustainability, by improving market access. We want the carrot, not the stick, or not only the stick. Positive trade incentive, as I mentioned, tech transfer, financing transfer, mean of implementation are key tools for protection and preservation of our one single planet, which is belong to all of us. We would rather avoid fragmentation in trade tools. Keeping and reducing subsidies with negative impact on the environment is key. Reforming green box to give more certainty and avoid greenwashing. Improving market access for environmental sustainable producing good, not only environmental good alone, that's market. Improving market access for agriculture production in general, improve better allocation of resources, and contribute to a better world and to contribute to reducing the warming of the climate. Thank you very much, Carolyn.
Thank you very much also, Ambassador. So I'm moving now to our last two speakers. We'll have time for you both. First is Ambassador Nella Tavita-Levy, who is the permanent representative of Samoa to the UN and international organizations in Geneva. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'll be brief because all key matters have been adequately covered by colleagues. But I want to just highlight, and I'm taking this out from what was prepared for me to speak on, skipping everything else that I know, carbon links. But you would know that Samoa is a small island developing state, highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, including sea level rise and extreme weather events. So for us, the climate crisis is not a distant threat, it's a lived reality for us. So it's our existence. But I know, as my colleague from China had alluded to, that we are here in Geneva to negotiate things that benefit the global good, not just for one. But for us, small island developing states, countries in the Pacific, the climate crisis is a lived reality. And we understand that the impacts of climate change affect the world. We view climate crisis as an issue that does not just affect the environment, but also our livelihoods, biodiversity, and economic growth, making sustainability a key priority. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the key. Sustainability is no longer cheap. It costs. And for a small island developing states, those costs add on to the challenges that we now face with the impacts of climate change. And so I just wanted to highlight the issue of vulnerability, that when we sit in Geneva, where we have been sent, tasked by our governments, for me to look across international Geneva from the lens of the impacts of climate change on every aspect of my country, trade, human rights, digital economy. And for here, when we negotiate rules, trading rules, remember the vulnerability of small island developing states. We look at net food importing countries. That's where we are. So how can we negotiate rules that reflect the vulnerability of a country that depends on food imports? So we should also look at how we can reduce that dependency on imports. My colleague Matthew had spoken about access to finance. That may not be the key problem, but it's maintaining that. Let's move away, if we are going to be unconventional, from ticking boxes, but extending that tick for a very long time to ensure that the impacts of our actions over the years are addressed, particularly for those that are vulnerable. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think for two points in particular. Firstly, for highlighting the urgency and the immediacy for the countries that are most vulnerable, but also for reminding us to look at this as a long-term game as well. In reality, sadly, we are not going to solve the climate crisis this year or next year. We need to build modes of cooperation that will endure for 20 or 30 years or more, and that requires a different kind of approach. So thank you very much for making that point to move beyond ticking boxes. I'm now delighted to turn to our last speaker, who is Ambassador Bollinger, the permanent representative of Switzerland to the WTO, and he also holds the chairmanship of the Committee on Trade and Environment at the moment. So delighted to leave you to close. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for also inviting, and I would like to, at the outset, thank the Geneva Trade Platform, and especially TESS and Carolyn and your team for having organized this important meeting. And I'm happy to see so many people attending this roundtable, and also this very diverse audience. Actually, as I'm having two hats, you mentioned it, Caroline, being the Swiss permanent representative and also the chairman of CTE, I should have to write to 10 minutes, but I will take the minutes that were not used by Nella Pipi and try to be short, as many things have already been said before. Let me start in my national capacity as Swiss ambassador. We strongly believe that trade and environmental sustainability can be mutually supportive, and that the WTO provides a unique platform to enhance coherence among the different policy objectives. This also means that from a systemic point of view, the WTO has to deliver results in order to maintain its relevance for international trade. To contribute to the necessary political momentum, Switzerland has joined, as many others also represented in this room, the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. Outside the WTO, we concluded, and that has been mentioned by my colleague Clare Kelly, in July, negotiations on the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, the ACC-TESS, with Costa Rica, Iceland and New Zealand. And I won't go into the details, but that also shows that agreements can also take place in a smaller format and show the way for the others in the hope of maybe one day reaching a multilateral agreement on these issues. Our hope is that this ambitious agreement can also be a solution for the WTO. In the meantime, we, Switzerland, remain engaged in different formats and in the initiatives that have also been mentioned, like the TESS, DPP, FFSR, paving the way for innovative approaches to trade and sustainability. Looking for possible ways to progress, Switzerland considers that specific trade tools increasing the use of environmental goods and services can play a significant role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing other environmental challenges. The biggest challenge that we face lies certainly in the lack of convergence in the membership. If the global community, including the WTO, recognizes the critical need for multilateral cooperation and collective action to address these challenges, we nevertheless see that unilateral measures adopted by members lead or can lead to trade frictions. Now, as a chair of the CTE, and I've carefully listened to colleagues around the room, and I will take up these points, but also take by your words. I believe that the core contribution of the CTE is fostering transparency and regulatory cooperation. Transparency enhances trust and accountability, which are essential for the effectiveness of trade-related climate policies. By providing a platform where WTO members can share their experiences, best practices and concerns, the CTE helps to avoid trade disputes and encourages the alignment of trade policies with climate objectives. Members have recently shown an unprecedented engagement for revitalizing CTE's work methods, and various members, also those present in the room, have put forward concrete proposals. We'll talk about them in the next meetings of the CTE. Furthermore, as part of this reform by doing process, the CTE has started organizing thematic sessions on key topics related to trade and environmental sustainability, including energy transition, and we will have a thematic session on trade-related climate measures in due course. These initiatives reflect the diverse perspectives and priorities of our members, yet they all share a common goal: to harness trade as a tool for addressing climate change while supporting sustainable development. I see in the breadth of issues raised within the CTE the consistent interest in better understanding the challenges and opportunities related to trade and climate, and a chance for building the trust and collaboration that we need. And also I would like to underline that we need now to start preparing for the next ministerial conference that takes place in 18 months, also after disappointing outcome at MC13, without having anything that has been